back to MFA Writers. I'm so happy to have you here. Today we've got a brand new episode with a fantastic emerging writer. But before we get to that, I wanted to take a moment to say thanks to Dave Malik, who left us a review on Apple Podcasts in November. Dave wrote, "Exceptional. I've been lurking around this site for the last 2 years, taking notes and making plans. This month I've begun my MFA application process, well armed by all I've been exposed to on and around MFA writers. I cannot say enough about the well-presented, substantive value of this podcast." Thank you so much for the kind words, Dave. It means a lot. And good luck with those applications. You can find MFA Writers on Instagram and Twitter, as well as mfawriters.com. We love to hear from listeners, so feel free to shoot us a direct message on one of those platforms, or an email at mfawriterspodcast@gmail.com. And if you have a minute to rate or review the show, the best place to do that is on Apple Podcasts. Doing so will help boost our podcast as we try to boost these amazing writers. Also, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, you can apply at mfawriters.com. On that same website, you can also click the support button to support us financially, if it's within your means. Or you can do so by going directly to buymeacoffee.com/mfawriters. Finally, as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with Matt Homrich-Knieling. Matt is a writer and educator based in Detroit, Michigan. He's a second-year MFA student at Western Connecticut State University, focusing on creative nonfiction and editing. Matt currently serves as editor-in-chief for Poor Yorick, the literary magazine housed at WestConn's MFA program. Matt is particularly interested in reading and writing speculative memoir. He has had essays published in Brevity Blog, Metro Parent, EdSurge, and elsewhere. Today, Matt has brought some of that writing to share with us.
Cool. Thanks, Jared. Super excited to be here. So this piece is called In the Living Room. "You missed out on a lot, huh?" I ask him. We're here again, my younger self and I, on the floral patterned couch with crinkle fabric, like little waves that form along the entire surface of the sectional. I run my fingers back and forth along this textured material like I always used to, and I notice he is too, so I stop. I want him to know that this couch belongs to him more than it does to me. Today, a deep blue mid-century modern couch occupies this space, though on the opposite side of the room, but he doesn't know that. He only knows this familiar floral furniture. It was mine, it is his. "What do you mean?" he asks. "Like sleepovers at Peyton's house, overnight class trips, all the things you couldn't do or tried to do and had to go home because you were scared of being away from mom and dad." "Oh yeah, I guess," he says. His face is almost expressionless. He looks around the room, slouched in the corner of the couch, his little feet dangling just above the floor. Maybe he's uninterested in the conversation, but I want to know more. "Does that make you feel sad?" I ask. From where I sit on one end of the couch, I can't get a full look at his face unless he looks directly at me. Right now, he looks down toward his feet. The edges of his lips curl up into a slight smile, which I assume means he's nervous. "Not really," he says. His words are soft, like he's never known pain or fear, though I know that isn't true. I pause and without realizing, notice that I'm rubbing the crinkle fabric again, a nervous habit. I don't want to push him too much, but I want to understand him more. I want to remember everything he's feeling, everything I felt. Maybe then I can understand what I feel today, understand what's wrong with me. So despite my inclination to step back, I decide to ask more questions. "Why not?" I ask. I try to make my voice soft, like a whisper, like an invitation rather than a command. "Staying home keeps mom and dad safe," he says. His answer comes quickly. He looks over at me and I try to smile, but my muscles pull my expression downward like anchors trying to tether onto the seafloor. I had completely forgotten this belief, this idea I had as a kid that I was somehow responsible for keeping my parents alive. But as soon as the words slip out of his mouth, his high-pitched voice sweet as honey, I remember. My separation anxiety was predicated on the belief that being away from my parents meant their death. I remembered this, but I forgot the solution my mind formed at such a young age. If I'm not apart from my parents, they can't die. To stay in close proximity to my parents required relentless diligence. It required sacrifices. These sacrifices, forgoing overnight birthday parties, faking sick to come home early from a sleepover, didn't bring feelings of sadness or exclusion. They brought instant relief. But that relief was quickly tainted by shame. What's wrong with me, I would wonder, once I was returned to the safety of my parents' presence. Like broken-in shoes that have softened and adjusted to the shape of your feet, this belief and this feeling folded back into my mind with such ease and familiarity. In the absence of my response, which my buzzing mind was unable to form right now, he continues. If I stay the night at a friend's house and mom and dad die in a car accident while I'm gone, it will be my fault. If I just stay home, nothing bad will happen to them. They will be safe. The enormity of these words contrasts with the smallness of his body. Such immense and impossible responsibility for anyone to carry, especially a child. He says this, and I feel compelled to help him undo this twisted belief. I remember that. I get it, I say. But it isn't your job to keep mom and dad safe, you know. I look at him, his face fixed out the row of windows opposite of us, and I watch his eyes blink rapidly, a strategy he uses to repel tears. I wait for his response, but he says nothing, so I continue, this time with the goal of providing solace with knowledge I realize I can share. And you know, your fears never came true. Mom and dad are still alive today. He looks over at me, his blinking eyes unable to keep up with the pace of the tears pooling in his eyelids, and he says, but maybe they wouldn't be alive if I didn't have those fears. Maybe they're alive today because of me. He spit these words out with a certain sharpness. He didn't want me to solve the problem for him. He just wanted to be understood, heard. I realize now that even if he wanted me to, I couldn't solve the problem for him. I realize now that I remember his burden of needing to keep mom and dad alive, not just because they're my memories from back then, but because they're my experience right now. The belief dissolved from my relationship with my parents and at some point reformed in other relationships. It never actually went away. I hear that, I say, with my own eyes now wet with tears. I really do. I know how scary and helpless that feels. He nods his head and we look at each other, tears traveling down our cheeks, knowing looks on our faces, our hands both pacing back and forth along the folds of the couch.
Matt, that was great. Thanks so much for sharing that with us, and thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you. I'm really glad you agreed to come on. I want to start off talking about your writing because I think the genre you're working in is really interesting and really unique. Speculative memoir. I'm sure some of our listeners, like me, have never heard of this before. So I was hoping you could tell us what speculative memoir means to you and what makes it the right genre to tell your stories.
Yeah, I appreciate the framing of the question of what does it mean to me? Because I think, I think it's a relatively new idea or term that's being used. Like I didn't come into the MFA program thinking I would write, like I didn't know that was a thing, a genre that existed. But I think how I would define it, or at least how I've come to understand it for me personally, is that, there's like this inherent tension in memoir that we can't ever like actually tell the truth, right? Like our memory is really subjective. We're often like narrating things that happened to us in the past with like ideas or insights we have about those experiences now that we didn't have then. So there's like this tension around like not really, like memoir can never really be fully objectively true. And I think speculative memoir, instead of like really trying to get as close to the like objective truth as possible, like really like leans into the subjective nature of memory and allows for things like our imagination, our curiosity about what might have happened in our lives or what could have happened differently, like really create space for us to explore those things. And so I think for me, right, like writing a story, writing a memoir that's grappling with my experiences of separation anxiety, I really think about, separation anxiety, mental health as Like it was really hard for me to think about how reality gets so warped in my experience of like separation anxiety that it can be hard to know what is true and hard to, I'm experiencing anxiety that are based on false beliefs about what is happening.
Right.
And so I think speculative memoir really gives me space to sort of like explore those subjective truths.
Yeah, it's so interesting that we're having this conversation now, because earlier this week I was thinking about this idea of like what it means to tell a quote unquote true story, because our memories are so fallible. How can we be sure anything that we think happened actually happened exactly in that way? But I was thinking about this idea that like actually what's probably more accurate than what actually happened, the actual events that happened in our memories, is how we felt during those experiences. Like what we felt, the emotions that we had are probably pretty accurate, right? The way that we remember them. So in what ways are you using that and playing with that when you're writing your stories?
The sort of like main approach that I'm taking, or sort of like one anchor in my thesis, which, like I said, is exploring my experiences of separation anxiety and sort of like thinking about some family history things and how my separation anxiety connects to some family history. One sort of like anchor, which was represented in the piece that I read here at the beginning, is I had this experience with a former therapist where the therapist was sort of facilitating these conversations between me and my younger self, as a way of sort of like getting at this part of me that experienced separation anxiety as a kid, and like really just like being present with that part of myself and really like trying to listen to it and understand it. And as I was experiencing that, it struck me that this is a really interesting way to tell the story of separation anxiety, is really just sort of like imagining myself in conversation with my childhood self, and seeing, like what like emotional truths I can pull from those imagined conversations.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of like one like anchor of my creative thesis that I keep coming back to.
Yeah, I love the way that you're framing that story, that excerpt that you read for us today. The idea of like your younger self as being another character in the story. Because I don't know about you, but when I think back on my life, often it doesn't feel like it was me who did those things when I was like a little kid, like it doesn't feel like it was me. It feels like a different person, and sometimes that's the way it forms in my mind. Like often my memories will be in third person instead of first person, but like it's interesting to approach your younger self in your story as separate from you in some way, separate but also connected, another character but also part of you. I imagine that's like really fertile ground for a lot of exploration in your work.
It is. Yeah. I mean, I think it like requires a really deep level of reflection to try to like think about like putting myself in conversation with my younger self in a way that like feels true, in a way that feels like, I don't know, like, I guess like I'm honoring my younger self. I sort of like that it takes away the guise of like, I can use I when I'm referring to myself as a 8-year-old, when I feel so removed from that person. And like, sometimes don't feel like I necessarily have the like, I don't know if I want to say like the authority to speak for that person, but like, there's something powerful about like trying to like give that part of myself its own voice as much as I'm able to.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were saying that, like, it probably makes it easier to empathize with your younger self. Like, when you're just thinking of that person as yourself when you're younger, sometimes, we're hard on ourselves, right? But like, if we were sitting down on a couch next to another young person who was going through those things that we went through, we might be more empathetic with that person. And so separating yourself from your younger self, I imagine, creates some like, I don't know, ability to see it more clearly and like give yourself a bit more empathy, which also I imagine could be like a wellspring for interesting writing.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, right? So I think like it's a really helpful lens to like think about speculative memoir. Cause like, obviously this conversation between my childhood self and I in the excerpt I read, like didn't happen in a like real physical sense. it came from, like a lot of reflection, a lot of like trying to remember my experiences, remember what it felt like in my body. And I feel like that, even though like the scene itself is imagined, it like, I think I got to more truths than I would have if I just tried to like tell those stories from a like first person point of view as they happened. I think it like allows me to get closer to some truths that I am not like as readily in touch with.
Well, yeah, it's really cool to hear you talk about your writing in this way and hear all the work that you've done on this project since joining the program, because you had very little creative writing experience before joining the MFA. You told me most of your writing experience at the time was from writing academic articles about education. So what made you want to pursue the MFA?
One, on a just sort of basic level, I just really love school. I love being in school and learning. And I had almost gone to grad school for like teaching or like writing adjacent things several times, but I was classroom teaching at the time, and I just never wanted to leave the classroom at that point. I like wasn't ready. So one, it just sort of like worked circumstantially for me. I was at a time where I had left teaching to stay at home with my kids, and was just doing some freelance writing like on the side. And as I was doing the freelance writing, which again was not super creative, it was like more professional writing, but I realized just how much I missed writing. Like when I was in high school and college, I did a lot more creative writing, and then I went right into teaching ELA in writing to middle schoolers. So like spent a lot of time not thinking about or practicing my own writing, but really like investing in young kids as readers and writers, which was wonderful and super fulfilling, and loved it. And then when I finally left the classroom and was getting back into writing, realized how much I missed it and how much I really loved writing. And so then it was also like a good time, since I wasn't teaching, like I had more capacity to go back to school. I think I also then was really interested in like being part of a community of writers and like having some like peer support, and also still really love teaching. So like wanted to be able to have the option of teaching college writing in some capacity.
So now that you've been in the program for a while, what do you think the pros and cons are of coming into a program with such a clean slate, with so much to learn?
Yeah, So I came into the program, like I've said, I was teaching for a while, and I felt like very in the world of English education. Like I had read a lot of the English education books. I attended the like national English teachers conference every year. I sort of like knew who was who. So I think like because I was so deeply in that world, I knew how deeply not in the world of creative writing I was in, right? Because I know that there's so much that goes into those spaces. So I think part of what made it challenging was like, going back to school after having been several years, lots of years out of undergrad. I think it like made imposter syndrome a bit easier to feel, some like insecurity. And I think there was also this sense of like, I don't know what I don't know. But I think that lends itself really well to low residency programs, or at least the one that I'm in. Because I think, like some of the pros were that like I was able to, especially that first 2 semesters, like be clear about that with my professors and like work with them to build my syllabus around, like I would sort of ask them like, I'm studying creative nonfiction, writing memoir. Who do I need to have read? Like, what are the craft books that like other people in this field that if I talk to them, like they will have all read this book. So I was able to like be clear about that with my professors and build up my syllabus around that. And I think the other like positive thing is I came in really open to, right? Like I knew I was going to be doing memoir, but I came in really open to understanding what that world was like and open to going in different directions. And I think I think that's part of what led me to speculative memoir, right? It was just like asking questions, trying to understand the field better. And then I had a professor my second semester as I was sort of describing how I'm imagining my creative thesis to go. I had also recently read Carmen Maria Machado's In the Dream House and was like describing that to her and was like, I don't even know what this was. It was incredible. And she was like, I think you're describing speculative memoir. And so I think like it allowed me to come in with a lot more curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like experiment, try different things and see like what worked for you.
Yeah.
I know when you decided to pursue the MFA, you had a very strict set of criteria that you were looking for in a program, which really narrowed down your list of programs you wanted to apply to. Do you mind telling us about that process? And do you have any advice for listeners when it comes to researching programs?
Yeah. So you're right. I had a very specific list. I knew it had to be low res. My family's pretty settled here in Detroit. So we weren't like moving wasn't really an option. I knew I wanted to be able to teach in the program. And I also really wanted to have the experience of having workshops. And so like those, like teaching in workshops aren't super common in low res programs. So that like really whittled my list down. And so I think, and that was super helpful. Like it in some ways so I guess my advice would be like to be really clear about what are the experiences you want in the program, and then do your research to find programs where you'll be able to have those experiences. And that, it took a long time to look into all the programs, but then it was like, okay, these are my ones to choose from.
How many programs did you end up applying to?
I applied to 3. I applied to 3 programs.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a short list. I mean, a lot of people probably apply to a lot more than that. So it's helpful that you can narrow it down and be like, okay, these 3 have exactly what I'm looking for. Saves you time and money when applying. And then you got into a program that ended up working really well for you. The more I hear about the program you're in at Western Connecticut State University, the more it sounds like perfect for you. It's a 2-year low residency program in creative and professional writing. The program has a lot of cool features that we're going to get into in a bit, but I want to start with the fact that they describe themselves on their website as a program for working writers. And one way the program seems geared towards working writers is that students choose not only a creative genre to focus on, but also a professional genre. So what genres did you choose and why? And what other options were out there?
Yes. So the program is designed where you have your creative and your professional genre. So for creative, I'm doing creative nonfiction and specifically memoir, which I was like, that's what I was looking for an MFA program to do. But for the professional, that was, not something I was thinking about as I was looking into MFA programs. And there's a lot of different options that people choose for their professional. Some people do like copywriting or content writing. People do like speech writing or grant writing. I decided to do editing for mine, which I think is like a newer focus that they have, or newer sort of concentration. But I had been doing a bit of content writing leading up to the MFA program, so I was interested in getting new professional writing skills. Yeah, and the one thing I'll add to thinking about that sort of tagline you read about it being a program for working writers, the amount of time that you finish the program can be pretty flexible in a way that accommodates for working folks. So I'm doing the program in 3 years. Some folks do it in 4 years. So there's like flexibility in that as well.
Cool. So yeah, you chose creative nonfiction and you chose editing for your professional genre, which the professional genre thing is not a thing that I've seen very many other programs do. So that's kind of a cool way to kind of focus in on ways you might use the MFA beyond just the creative part of it, right? I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit more about how choosing those genres affects your path through the MFA.
Yeah, so your creative genre, it doesn't, you take the same set of courses regardless of the genres you choose. It's just like I guess for either one, it's, like which professors you end up working with and how you design your syllabus. But I think it's for the professional genre, you do 2 courses. There's a course focused on like reading within that genre, and then a course focused on writing within that genre. Some people decide at the end to do their thesis in their professional genre versus their creative. So that's, I guess, another way that it would change the trajectory of the program. But otherwise, you're taking the same set of courses. Obviously, just like the design of the syllabus would look really different.
So you've mentioned a couple times this idea of designing your syllabus. That's not necessarily a thing that students have to do in all MFA programs. So what does that entail, and just how much flexibility do you have in this program for like choosing what classes you take?
Everyone takes the same courses. So there's like, for example, writing in the primary genre 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
There's like a genre, history, theory, and criticism class. So like they're sort of like courses that are kind of like broad umbrellas. And then before the semester starts, you meet with your professor for that course, and they sort of ask about your goals for the program, where you're at with your thesis, like what readings have you done so far? It's pretty, like open conversations, and then work together on coming up with a reading list. There's like requirements for each course, like you have to turn in this many number of pages by the end of this course, but you can work with your professor to figure out how you want to divide that up throughout the semester. That's like, I love it. That's part of the fun for me, is like being able to think about like what are things I'd really want to read in this course, or, like asking questions to learn about things that I want to read.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so you also mentioned that teaching was one of the things that you really wanted in a program, but it's not super common in low-res programs. Western Connecticut State University does offer that opportunity. How does the teaching work at WCSU?
Yeah, so I live in Detroit, as we've said, so I'm not in Connecticut. So the course that we teach, that MFA students teach, is it's called Intro to the Creative Process. So it's basically like an intro to creative writing course that covers fiction, creative nonfiction, and poetry. And usually each semester there's 2 online sections of the course. And so I've been able to teach one online section each semester that I've been in the program. But a lot of folks in the program, maybe like, I don't know, 75% or so of the students are in Connecticut. And so other folks do their teaching assistant in person. And yeah, and with that too, there's like quite a bit of flexibility on designing your syllabus, right? We have the general structure of like you're teaching those 3 genres, but you can choose your readings, you can choose sort of how you want to organize the class. And then the TAs, we meet once a week with the director of our program throughout the semester to just sort of like talk about how teaching is going, things we're struggling with, things we want advice on, just like sort of a weekly support system.
What kind of funding do you receive in return for teaching?
If you're teaching just one class, that would be like a part-time graduate assistantship, and you get a stipend of $2,400. If you're teaching 2, or the program has other graduate assistantship options. So like some people will do a graduate assistantship in the writing center. I have like a second part-time one with the literary journal. So if you have like a 2 course load, or, like teaching in another part-time one, it's $4,800 each semester. But with that, if you're enrolled full-time as a student, you also get a fee waiver, which comes out to like a little over $3,000. Yeah. So taking full-time courses in a full-time GA ends up, like putting a lot towards your tuition.
You also mentioned earlier that your program requires you to take 3 workshops, which is another thing that's pretty unique for low-res programs and something that you were really hoping to have in a program. I'm curious to hear you talk about that. Are you doing workshops online, like synchronous online workshops with people? Is this an asynchronous thing? Is this like only in person during the residency period? How do these workshops work that you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, so these are actual like courses in the semester that you take, and I think I messed it up. We do 4. You have to do 4 workshop courses throughout your time in the program. So if you were doing it in 2 years, you would do a workshop every semester. Yeah, so I've done 2 now with 2 different professors, so they run them a little bit differently. But like my first semester, I was in a group. Like there were maybe like 12 of us in the course, and then there was me and 2 other students that were in a group, and we were together the whole semester. And so we would turn in our pages to each other. We would give each other feedback digitally. And then afterwards we would meet together and, give each other our feedback over Zoom. And then this past semester, we switched groups every time we had to submit work. So you were in a group of like 3 to 4 and kind of the same setup, turning your pages to each other, give each other feedback. And the professor for the workshop course is also giving everyone feedback on their work as well. So that's great. I really, really wanted that in a program. I think there's so much value to being able to get peer feedback and to just read your peers' work. I learned so much from reading other people's writing.
Absolutely.
So I love that.
Yeah, a lot of low-res programs outside of the residency period, you would just be doing your writing, maybe turning in pages to whatever professor you're working with that semester and getting some feedback in that way. But yeah, being able to read work from lots of different writers and think about it more deeply and provide that feedback and get that feedback from people is kind of a totally different experience. So how has it been? Has it been a lot of fun?
Yeah, it's been great. I think there's a different dynamic getting feedback from peers than from professors that I think just can feel different. And I think it also has helped me. One of the things I said earlier is part of what I wanted in an MFA program was to be connected to a community of writers,
right? Which
I sort of knew that that desire and needing a low res program there's some tension between those things. So I knew there were going to be some limitations, but the workshop has definitely helped create a sense of community. I think especially coming off the residencies that we have where we're in person and it's really great. We get to be in workshops together and lectures together. And then in some way that is able to continue, throughout the semester with these workshops.
Well, let's talk about those residencies a bit more. Like most low residency programs, you all meet a couple times a year in person. And your program sponsors an annual book award called the Housatonic Book Award. And the winners in each genre come to the residency and lead workshops with the students, which sounds pretty cool to me. So tell us about that experience.
Yeah, residencies are amazing. In the summer, WestCon, my program holds their residency at the highlights, Highlight, the magazine that are in the waiting room of the dentist office. They have a retreat center in the Poconos. And so our summer residency is always there, which is just beautiful. So it's about 5 or 6 days of really just packed schedule of workshops and lectures. And like you said, the program has the Housatonic Book Awards, which every year there's a fiction, nonfiction, and poetry book that receives the award. And then those authors come, they do, they give a lecture or a reading or a workshop. And then one evening they do a reading and then a Q&A, just sort of open conversation period. So that's been really, really cool. My first year was great. We had Jason Mott, who wrote Hell of a Book, which was a National Book Award winner, and Sandra Beasley, who's a really great poet. And I think it's cool because it's, people outside of your genre as well. So you really get to learn a lot of things outside your genre that, you always find ways to bring back to your own writing.
And when you say they come and do a workshop, that means, are you giving them your work and they're giving you some feedback on it?
No, most of them are more lecture style. What's cool though is that there's at least the option, this isn't a requirement of being a Housatonic Book Award winner, but there's an option where if you really, really resonated with one of them, got along really well with one of the book award winners, that you could talk to the program director who could reach out to them and ask if they would be a faculty mentor for you for one of your courses in a subsequent semester, which is cool. Yeah. So, it expands your options of who you can work with throughout the program.
That's great. And I also saw on the website that students have the option to maybe do a residency in Dublin.
Yeah, every fall, there's a Dublin residency. I haven't done it. I don't anticipate doing it. It's just, hard for me and having young kids at home. But people who do it love it. People really, really love the residency. And like that also like counts as one of your residencies. So you have to do 4 throughout your time in the program. And so that like counts as one of your requirements as well. Yeah. So I can't speak, much to the experience other than everyone who's done it says that they really love it.
Well, one last cool thing about the program that I wanted to talk about is the fact that the literary magazine Poor Yorick is housed in the program, which is not super common for low-res programs to have a journal that the students can work on. And you are currently the editor-in-chief. So how's that experience been?
Yeah, that was another thing that I didn't have as like a criteria for a program. But when I saw that WestCon had a literary journal, I was really excited about that. It's been great. Last year, my second semester just like volunteered as a reader. And so, so this year I'm the editor-in-chief. We actually just closed our submissions for our spring issue, January 1st. And it's been really, really great. It's weird being on the like backside of a journal. But it's been, I work with a team of, I've got like 2 lead readers for fiction and poetry. And then we've got a couple other folks in the program who support with reading as well. So it's been another cool opportunity to be like collaborating with students in the program and talking about people's writing. Also, just like same with workshops, you just learn so much from seeing what other people are doing in their writing. And it's like, I think for me, just sort of like demystifying the like literary journal world, right? Like there's just like people behind it reading your submissions and having really hard conversations about like, sometimes it's like, this is a really, really great piece of writing. We love it. Do we see it fitting within this issue? Do we see it like fitting our vision for the theme, So yeah, it's been really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I worked on a literary magazine when I was in my program as well, and it's right up there near the top of recommendations that I give MFA students. If you can work on a literary magazine, even just as a reader, I think it's super beneficial just to see the process, to see how many submissions come in and how these magazines make those decisions. I found it super useful when I was a student. Have you noticed it changing your writing at all? Have you noticed it changing your submission process, how you think about submissions, anything like that?
I think in terms of my submission process, I feel maybe, I don't want to say more confident because I'm more confident, but just sort of like, I guess maybe like taking it less personally or just like, like it feels, maybe like a little bit lower stakes, sending things off places. And I think in terms of writing, you just like see so many cool things that people are doing or like experimenting with different forms, different structures. We're like pretty deep right now in finishing going through all of our submissions. So excited to see what else we have.
Yeah, one of the big things that I learned was to stop being so hard on myself, because what I found was that like so many of the decisions around what gets accepted and what doesn't is like, it has nothing to do with the writing itself. It just has to do with, does it fit into this issue? Or like, okay, we have like 10 great stories, but we can only pick 6 of them. Like, we're just going to have to cut 4 great stories. And you just never know when you submit if yours was one of those great stories that just didn't quite fit in that issue, right? So I learned to stop taking rejection as like an indictment on my writing.
Right. Yeah. And, sometimes you start to see ways in which like submissions fit really well together and can be sort of like in conversation with each other, which then, like you're saying, not accepting other pieces then doesn't have anything to do with the quality of that writing. It's just that like, it's not sort of like fitting in with how the issue is taking shape.
Right. Well, all of this has been super interesting. The speculative memoir stuff, super interesting. The program sounds really unique. Before we go, I want to give you the last word. What is one way in which the MFA experience has been different, for better or for worse, from your expectations when applying?
Yeah, I think, I sort of said this earlier, but I think the extent to which I feel part of a community of writers in a low-res program, I think is different than what I was expecting. It was what I was hoping for, but it was, like I didn't, maybe I had like lower expectations for like the extent to which I would feel part of a community in a low-res program. But I think through the workshops, through teaching. So like getting able to like interact with undergrad students in the university and then meeting weekly with the TAs. I just feel really, like part of a program in a way that I wasn't expecting to in a low res.
Well, Matt, this has been great. Thank you so much for stopping by. I wish you all the luck on finishing up that thesis project. Good luck with all those submissions at Poor Yorick. Really appreciate you taking the time and chatting with me.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really, really loved the conversation.